Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Sikander Iqbal from the Urban Peace Movement. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, rough week for criminal justice reform in California as we're recording this on the Friday of election week. What does the passage of Prop 36 mean for the future of criminal justice reform?
Well, I think first of all, Prop 36 undoes a lot of the victories we had won for criminal justice reform through Prop 47. I think back in like 2014 or so. And some of the things that we've seen since Prop 47's passing is an increase in programs and services, particularly drug treatment and mental health treatment programs. We've seen a reduction in criminal records, or reduction in recidivism. We have youth crime or youth incarceration is at an all-time low. And so we've seen a lot of these wins across the board where we're investing in the things that we've been advocating for decades, and we're seeing the results that we said we would get, right? Like lower crime, more support and more services would lead to lower crime, less violence, and things like that. And we've seen those results. But we've had the pandemic, and we've had billions of dollars, specifically in the Bay Area, millions of dollars poured into campaigns to make people believe otherwise, and to weaponize some of the stuff that's happened through the pandemic, or some of the stuff caused by the pandemic, to push us backwards and go back to failed war on drugs and tough on crime policies, which we've already seen the results for, right? The things that we've been pushing back against for at least the last 10, 20 years have been the ramifications of the war on drugs and tough on crime policies. And so, so part of what I do want to make sure we're clear on is that I'm pretty confident that the passage of Prop 36, the recall of the DA, the recall of the mayors, saying that they're not taking care of crime or that they're too progressive, that I don't feel like it's clear that those are signs that voters don't want criminal justice reform or don't want progressive leadership. And the way that I know that that's true is you could just look at who's funding these efforts, right? If you look at Prop 36, the passage for Prop 36 had to have $12 million for their campaign. The opposition to Prop 36, I think we had about $5 million. So we're super out fundraised, super out spent. And a lot of that is about the level of funding they have to misinform the public about their initiative. Same with Prop 33, the act that would have helped really chip away at Costa-Hawkins, which has been a very harmful policy that's impacted a lot of people and has really helped fuel gentrification in a lot of our neighborhoods. Prop 33 did not pass, and that is because of how confusing the opposition made it, with all the money they poured in to, rather than getting people information about the propositions and trying to pass what they think will actually help. It's very clear that a lot of these recalls and propositions that have hurt our progress been funded by people who have ulterior motives. So
I think from my perspective, the most frustrating aspect of this is that the case that was made, the narrative that came up over the last several years, doesn't actually reflect the data that we know. And there are multiple parts to this, right? Because obviously crime really did go up during the pandemic, and understandably so, with everything thrown into a tizzy. But if you look at California compared to other states, if you look at progressive prosecutor areas in California compared to traditional prosecutors, the data isn't there that it's worse in California, and the data isn't there that it's worse in the areas with progressive prosecutors as opposed to tough on crime prosecutors. And in fact, the data shows the opposite. And here's a piece of data that just came out, unfortunately. But Oakland, the city of Oakland, didn't have a murder in the month of October for the first time in over a decade. So here you are recalling the DA because she's weak on crime, and you have this amazing stat that comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad that that happened in October, because the other things that we know will happen is that a lot of the work that we've done across the board, statewide and locally, in terms of getting progressive leadership in place to enact funding for, or to direct funding towards programs and services, and also to get people to focus on rehabilitation instead of incarceration and punitive measures. A lot of that work that we've done, we're now finally seeing the some of the results of that work, like the a month of October with no homicides, and record lows in crime. The Center for Juvenile and Criminal Justice has put out a blog citing a report from the FBI data that California's crime rate is at record lows, despite the crime wave lie that's persisting. And so I say that because we're getting all this information in October. And in November, all these laws pass and all these recalls happen. What's going to happen is I worry that they're going to try to take credit for our successes over the first part of 2025, because we're not going to really, we won't immediately see the impacts of the recalls and the laws that have changed. And so I know they're going to say, oh, look, now January has a record low, or December, they'll start to talk about, I think that's what they always do. They're going to try and take credit for our successes, but we do anticipate that the repeal of Prop 46 is going to have 1.5 million people incarcerated that normally would not have been incarcerated over the next 10 years. We know that this is going to impact adults and juveniles. This is going to impact people across their whole lives by increasing what folks can get felonies for. And we know felonies are not things that just only stay with you while you're incarcerated. Felonies are things that do follow you your entire life. And the other thing that's going to hurt is that Prop 47 directed a lot of funding towards programs and services, the same programs and services that are promised by Prop 36, right? They talk about mandated treatment programs, but the funding for a lot of those treatment programs is going to dry up because of Prop 36. So they're really promising something that they don't have any funding for, because they're also killing the funding stream for the programs that they're claiming that they're going to mandate. So, we're going to, long term, we're in a lot of trouble if we don't find a way to really clap back at these things that have moved forward last Tuesday. If we don't find a way to address them immediately, we could see things. Crime will increase, violence will increase, youth incarceration will increase, and then adult incarceration will likely increase as well. So,
and one of my big concerns is that we saw this really starting in 2020. People really reacted to short-term rises in crime by kind of rolling back on all sorts of reforms that had occurred. And then what's going to happen is that there's not going to be an instant effect from like Prop 36. What's going to happen is, over time, as more people are incarcerated, it's going to turn things back. But it's going to be such a slow process of turning things back that it's not going to register with people the same way that the increase in crime did.
No, that's absolutely true, and I think that's what I worry about. And I think they're gonna, So we're gonna see that across the board, and so we just have to make sure that we stay on top of that, and we make sure that people understand what's happening, because a lot of this is data that needs to be pulled out, and people need to, people aren't going to see the data, and even the data itself. I don't know what to do with that. I think a report just came out about OPD having different reports going to the DOJ and different reports that they're sending to the media that have all been used to sensationalize the crime wave or the fake crime wave, because it's not really a crime wave, right? Like we're at record lows on everything. And so if we're just talking about what's happening during the pandemic, these are issues that we saw nationally because of the pandemic, and so how do we take back control of the narrative and push things in towards into the light of truth, rather than allowing them to misinform and scare the public into passing punitive measures that are really going to hurt everybody. It's going to hurt the people across the board. It's going to disrupt families. We're just going to ending up back into a situation that we dealt with in the 90s. And so it's really it's disheartening to see, but I'm not disappointed in the voters. I'm more kind of frustrated by, what do we do when we're so out resourced? Even the recall campaign, for example, I believe that the opposition for the recall to stop it was, I think they raised $500,000, but the amount of money that was poured into the recall campaign for the DA in Alameda County was $4.5 million. So how are you supposed to compete with that? Because you could have a mass ad campaign, a mass disinformation campaign, and I don't know what laws there are around misinformation when these things come out. There were other ad campaigns I saw where they were doctoring videos, making it look like candidates were supporting things that they weren't supporting, just to sway public opinion out of their favor. And so I don't know. I mean, these are all questions that we need to answer, because we have until the next election to figure out what we're going to do to address these things.
And Urban Peace Movement works with urban youth. What components of Prop 36 do you think are going to most impact the people that you guys work with?
Well, I mean, I think all of them, right? I think with Prop 36, some of the things that we'll definitely need to worry about are just the increased risk for felony charges, and how that can affect people directly and indirectly, especially in our neighborhoods, specifically around drug and theft offenses. And really even more of a focus on the drug offenses, and how it could lead to this escalation here could lead to longer sentences and more severe criminal records, really impacting people's ability to get education and employment after they're serving their time. And like I said, the felonies will follow you for your whole life, killing a lot of these mandated treatment programs, potential for increased incarceration and increased recidivism, because the way things have changed, when you don't put people in positions where they can't work and can't go to school and things like that, or can't get financial aid, then they end up in situations where they might end up back in jail. And so we have seen reductions in recidivism because of things like Prop 47, which Prop 36 now turns the clock back on. And we know we're going to see a reduction in community resources. So now the burden is elsewhere to figure out how to plug these gaps that we're definitely going to feel. Like you said, it's not going to be immediate, but over time, about a year out, we're going to start to see the impact of Prop 36 and how severely it's going to impact our communities that really need more resources now, rather than having more resources taken away. We should be seeing the opposite, but this is where we are. So,
And you mentioned, like, in the recall of Pamela Price, the spending was almost 10-1 against her. Who are the big backers that are supporting Prop 36 and also the recall of Pamela Price?
well, a lot of this tough on crime and war on drugs and punitive support for punitive things have really come from outside of the area. These are a lot of billionaires, a lot of big corporations. I believe, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think Target, Walmart, Home Depot were some of the bigger funders. Is that correct? I know Home Depot's on there for sure, and Target was on there, but
A lot of the retail.
yeah, a lot of the retail
Retail.
folks, right? And so, we have a lot of police associations. So if you look on there, Prop 36 is almost like it's unanimous support across the board from sheriff's departments, police departments, their unions and things like that. And so there's a lot of private prison interest as well in pushing us back into this state of a failed war on drugs, and really trying to enhance, or not enhance, but take us backwards in fighting against mass incarceration. And Yeah, and these are people who the people who are really going to be impacted the most are people that need addiction treatment, people that need housing support, people that need mental health support. And rather than coming up with solutions to support people, they've come up with ways to really profit off of people's pain and really create more dysfunction and more harm in our communities. And the taxpayers are going to be the ones that are going to have to foot the bill for all of the consequences of Prop 36 that have been pushed out by, like I said, law enforcement, retail corporate interests, and private prison interest.
And one of the interesting things is that, Prop 36 is fairly modest in terms of what it actually does. One of the aspects that it does change is it allows for repeat offenses to basically make a crime that otherwise would have been a misdemeanor be a felony. But if you look at what people are actually concerned about, these kind of smash and grabs, the organized theft, that's all felony conduct anyway. So this isn't going to impact that, right? You can
Absolutely not.
charge people with conspiracy, you can charge them with robbery, you can charge them with grand theft. In most cases, it's going to be above 950. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's actually a lot lower than
Yeah,
in a lot of states. And then the people that you're actually going to end up impacting are actually not the ones that people are concerned about. They're the people that are, maybe chronic shoplifters, and they're stealing a little bit to support their drug habit or something like that. Those aren't the people that people are worried about.
right. I mean, even all, yeah, you're right. All the news clips that these social media channels that have been paid to paid by these campaigns to sensationalize, none of that is really going to be affected. What really affects those things, if people really cared about that to look into it, would be finding out who's financing a lot of it. There's been at least one, maybe two crime rings that were run by people who were living really fat. I can't remember all the details because it didn't really get that much airtime in the media, but there was a woman and a man who lived out in the suburbs, and they were financing a lot of these smash and grabs because they had I think $2 million of stuff in their apartment that they were, or in their house, in their garage, that they were selling on Amazon and eBay and things like that. So that's really where you need to go to shut a lot of this down. Or even the Chesapeake led a investigation to shut down some of the smash and grabs or the bipping in San Francisco, and he found who's actually leading this effort, who's paying people to go out and do these smash and grabs or do break windows and things like that. And I'd love to see the data now. I could just tell you from anecdotally, the bipping has severely declined. It's severely declined. The bipping seemed like it was really big at one point, especially coming out of the right around the end of the pandemic time, and then around the time where they were gathering signatures for a lot of these ballot measures. But the bipping has severely declined since then, and so that's just something to keep in mind. And I hope that there's some data around there that somebody could pull out and highlight, like, where are the property crimes, where's the bipping, where's all this stuff gone? Because none of these so-called solutions have come into place yet. And I don't see smash and grabs like I was seeing during the pandemic or right after the pandemic. I don't see bipping. I don't see any of the things that they're claiming that they're going to clean up or fix happening anymore, because we're 4 years out of the pandemic now and things have normalized and we're back to where we were pre-pandemic, where everything is moving in the direction it's supposed to, except now the laws are going backwards, and they're going to undo a lot of the progress that we made over the last decade.
In California, the felony limit, the floor for a felony is $950, which went up from 400 a decade ago. But that 400 figure, by the way, started in 1972. So that was a 40-year-old total that was never indexed to inflation. Now, if you look across the country, California is still in the lower third in terms of that 950. States like Texas and Florida are over 2,000. And so, there's no, and the other factor that people don't talk about is that, yeah, retail theft went up during the pandemic in California, but guess what? It went up in Texas during the pandemic. It went
Right.
up in Florida during the
Everywhere.
pandemic.
That's right.
And so to blame Prop 47 for that is just violates any law of data analysis.
Yeah, you know what else I love too is I'm glad you brought up that point about the $400 limit from 1972, because I think with inflation that would be about $3,000 today.
Right. So, I mean, that's, and really, I mean, if you think about how easy it is to buy $400 worth of merchandise, it's not that much. If you grab,
One laptop, you're
yeah,
ordering it. Yeah. And I think the opposite, if we said, oh, so it's 950 now, the equivalent of 950 back in 1972 would be like $70.
right.
So yeah, I mean, but I think it is, there's facts and then there's what's sensationalized. What can you sensationalize, and who has enough money and resources to manipulate data, manipulate headlines, manipulate media to push the agenda that they have to move forward. Whether, because we're voting about livelihood, and we're pushing ideals around what's going to help improve people's lives, right? Your experience day to day, and they're pushing what's going to help make them more money at the end of the day, what can line their pockets. And so we have very different interests. Our interest is, are people going to be better off today than tomorrow? And for them, it's, what can make them some more money, what can increase their profits even more. Which is also another thing to point out is that, and correct me if I'm wrong again, is during this time of all this sensationalized fear mongering, I believe a lot of these companies, these retail stores and companies, saw record profits as well.
And they cut back on employees,
Right.
because they've gone to more automation, and that's kind of this under discussed factor, that if you have fewer bodies in the store, it's harder to stop people from stealing. Whereas, if you had more employees walking around the store, it'd make it much more difficult for people to actually get away with swiping merchandise.
Well, there's that, and then also I believe a majority of theft in retail happens internally too. So
There's also that.
I think this is the bigger point, is like the shrink, as I call it, which is theft at a lot of these retail places. The percentage hadn't really changed in terms of external theft and internal theft. It was just them sensationalizing these stories so that they could push back on progressive movements. And the reason why it's important for them to attack California and the Bay Area is because we are one of the areas, if not the primary area, that influences progressive legislation nationally. Like if we demonstrate stuff works here, then that's what really encourages other cities and states to be more progressive in the way they address crime, violence, resources, treatment, and things like that. And so when we're seeing progress here through progressive prosecution, through treatment programs, through supportive housing, through passing laws that help regulate gentrification and make it easier for people to afford to live in the areas where they work. We start doing that, and then you see some people come with millions of dollars to push back on these successful measures. It kind of makes you wonder what their real motivations are, right? Because it's not like they live out here and they're being impacted by these. These are people who aren't even from here or don't live here. So what's their larger interest? And we just know at the end of the day, it's going to hurt us on a day-to-day basis. It's going to hurt the people we love. It's going to hurt all the people in our communities are going to be impacted by this negatively.
And I'll throw out one more tidbit. In early 2023, the New York Times came out with a story that, the retail association that represents all these groups greatly exaggerated the amount of loss from theft by orders of magnitude.
Right. And that's the same that we had Walgreens out here. Walgreens was closing stores and blaming theft. And that also came out to be untrue, that it wasn't theft, had nothing to do with the reason why they were closing their stores either. And that was reported, I believe, in the Chronicle as well. That
Right.
they're a part of that, what you're talking about right now.
So as we're getting close to needing to wrap up here, I wanted to ask you, kind of an important question from the standpoint of the urban peace movement. So going forward, after all this stuff has changed, how is this going to change your work? What are you guys going to be focusing on in the next few months?
Specifically as it relates to the passage of these, that's still something we're trying to figure out because it's only been 3 days, I think, or 4 days. So we've been,
Fair enough.
just like everybody else, we've been dealing with just trying to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, because it's a marathon, right? And so we just have to make sure that we're practicing some level of self-care, and also just making sure we're being as strategic and sound as possible when we figure out how we're going to move forward, and what we're going to focus on moving forward. Obviously, as it relates to Prop 36, our fight and the work we do for alternatives to incarceration, alternatives to policing, creating safe communities, it didn't start or stop with Prop 36. The road ahead it will be much more difficult. Now we do know that for sure. But our commitment is where we have principles we focus on and long-term goals, and so Prop 36 just does set us back, but it doesn't change our end goal to to end mass incarceration, to create safety in our communities, and create communities where people care for each other and are able to thrive and live good lives. And that's what we'll continue to focus on. How we get there, that's to be seen. We'll continue to do the work we're doing now. We have our youth leadership groups where we're working with young folks to help get them engaged, or help them engage in things that they're already passionate about, because a lot of these young people are really already engaged. So we just want to provide space for them, platforms for them to elevate their voices, to engage their communities, and whatever skills and assets we can provide to them to help them grow and take care of themselves, their families, and their communities. We'll continue to do that, and working with our partners across the state to continue to do the work we're doing. So whether that's figuring out how to end slavery in prison, or shift us back towards focusing on as a state and in these localities, getting us back to focusing on alternatives to incarceration and alternatives to policing, and proven ideas that have shown to create safety. And we'll continue to do those things. We have our events every year, and we don't engage and employ any of those things. We focus on all community-based solutions and demonstrate. Even during the height of the pandemic and the crime sensationalization that was happening, we had events with 3, 4, 5,000 people, and we were able to practice what we preach and engage all of the alternatives we talk about, and have events that were beautiful events in the city of Oakland, at the lake, downtown West Oakland. So we'll continue to do these things in Deep East Oakland, and engage folks and do our best to give people factual information so we can continue to push things in the direction that we were already headed in prior to the election. So
since you brought it up, I'll ask you. You mentioned Prop 6. To me, that's maybe the most disconcerting result that came out of Tuesday, simply because, first of all, there was no organized opposition to it, and second, states like Alabama and Kentucky overwhelmingly passed similar measures, and California couldn't do it.
yeah, and I was surprised by that as well. And so my assumption is the same thing I've gone through, is like, why was this not passed? There was no opposition to it. And I do think that it's probably, if anything, it's tied to two things. One is there are some people that were opposed to it, but not finance to go against it. And, you know, like there are places saying that California prisoners should not be subjected to abuse by their jailers. What does it say from Mercury News and East Bay Times editorial board? Inmates should not be legally empowered to dictate what chores they're willing to do while behind bars. This is why voters should reject Prop 6, measure cloaked in language about slavery and involuntary servitude. That's really about prisoners being able to turn down work assignments, or requiring inmates to sweep floors, clean bathrooms, and cook in kitchens is reasonable. If we expect the same of ourselves and our children, I mean, it's just the fact they even said that is embarrassing. But I think that kind of encapsulates like where people's thinking is. So when we talk about all the sensationalism around crime, a lot of the hatred of poor communities, a lot of the criminalization of communities of color, and just the general feeling that people have towards crime and people convicted of crimes, right? Even though we know that the criminal justice system is racist and most people are convicted of crimes that they shouldn't be convicted of, or incarcerated for things that they really don't need to be incarcerated for in the first place. So we know there's all these issues, but despite all that, people just generally have a feeling of a dehumanizing take on people who are incarcerated. And I do hope that that's something that changes too, and that's something that we should also maybe, as a movement, spend more time on. You know, and I don't know if this fits in here or not, but even with a lot of the opposition to Donald Trump, it really did rub me the wrong way when one of the talking points to sway voters away from Donald Trump was the fact that he's a felon, right? And so it's just like, he's at 37. It's like, why does his felony? I get the strategy, but I felt like that was a really harmful talking point for the left to be touting. But it makes sense because even a large majority of people on the Democratic side, not the left, but the Democratic side, excuse me, they don't like people who have been convicted of anything. You know, and that's why a lot of these laws are harmful, because once you give somebody a felony, it follows them for life, which even if it did, it shouldn't matter. But the fact that it follows them for life is because you have a scarlet letter that you've been to prison, and you're tainted now for the rest of your life, which is why we're still fighting for people who are released from incarceration. They should be able to vote. They should be able to get any job they want. They should be able to get any license they want. There's like a list of, I think, 2,000 licenses you can't get if you have a felony. And it's like, you know, these are the type of things that we have to continue to push back against, because Prop 6 definitely shows that with no working opposition, nobody working in opposition to this ballot, it failed. And that's because the way that we talk about people who have been incarcerated and the way we treat people who have been incarcerated. And that's something that needs to change.
Well, I definitely completely agree with everything you just said. It'd be an interesting next show to talk about the felony and Donald Trump, because I completely agree on that. It always bothered me. In fact, I kept telling my wife, stop saying that, because you know, and she's like, well, he's not getting held accountable. But I get it, but it doesn't help the broader picture that we're trying to dehumanize people by labeling them as criminals, felons, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks, Sikander, for coming on and
just real quick, I'd say with Donald Trump, there's 1,000 other things you could say about why he shouldn't be. And in the conversation even about his felonies could really be more geared towards his you know, the white privilege that he carries to be able to have all these things be ignored. And so that's what I've tried to tell people. But I just wanted to just squeeze that in there before we close out. So thank you so much again for having me and Urban Peace Movement on the show. You know, we're big fans, so we definitely love to hear the stuff you guys are putting out. So thank you so much for reaching out and having us on.
We've been talking with Sikander Iqbal about Prop 36 and the whole criminal justice reform movement and what happened in the election last week. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next week for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.georgepow.com. justiceforgeorgepowell.com.